All right, a little bit after 7:30, we're going to get going here. This is a meeting of the Wenham Zoning Board of Appeals. Having seen no one run for the exits, I assume you're all here intentionally and you're forewarned. A couple of housekeeping matters. First, this is being recorded, so if you participate, your voice, your likeness will be part of the record and saved for later viewing on local access cable and HW Cam. Second, for those of you who've been here before us recently, for the first time in a long time, we are without our fearless leader, Tony Faheri. He was under the weather, but wishing him a speedy recuperation, and that we'll hear his dulcet tones at the very next meeting, hopefully. Maybe we could start with, we have one item on the agenda. It is an amended application, or an application to amend a previously issued decision by this board regarding affordable housing on Maple Street. And Margaret, maybe we could start with you reading the notice of the meeting.
The Zoning Board of Appeals of the Town of Wenham, Massachusetts will hold a public hearing on Wednesday, January 15th, 2020 at 7:30 p.m. at the Wenham Town Hall, 138 Main Street. This hearing will be on the petition of Harbor Light Community Partners for an amendment to a comprehensive permit issued to Harbor Light Community Partners on June 18th, 2015, pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40B, for the construction of a 60-unit age-restricted affordable housing development at 62 Maple Street, Wenham, Assessor's Map 23, Lot 16. Amendments include reducing the number of units to 45 and relocating the building on the site. Plans of Anthony Perry, Wenham Board of Appeals, for publication in the Chronicle and Transcript, Thursday, December 26, 2019, and Thursday, January 3rd, 2020.
Thank you. Before we invite the applicant to speak, I thought maybe it might make sense. We're joined at the table here by Counsel Adam Costa, who's been participating on behalf of the town in connection with the appeal of the decision of this board and other litigation. Mr. Costa, if you could spend a few minutes describing for our board here and also those in attendance, I guess, where we are and how we got here. I think that might help set the table for the rest of the discussion for the evening.
I'd be happy to. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Nice to be with you tonight. So as you indicated, it's been a lengthy path. These proceedings began back in 2015, and a comprehensive permit decision issued from this board back in the summer of 2015, which hard to believe was 4.5 years ago. And that comprehensive permit was issued pursuant to the comprehensive permit law in Massachusetts, known as Chapter 40B, which authorizes affordable housing developments, or developments that include an affordable housing component. The project was proposed as a 60-unit rental project. That is what was approved by this board, subject to a series of conditions and a rather comprehensive decision that the board issued in June of 2015. There was subsequent litigation that ensued. There was an appeal of that comprehensive permit. There was more or less simultaneously a challenge to the septic permit that issued from the town's Board of Health. Those two lawsuits ran in unison for a period of years. We litigated. The town played a role in the litigation, but the residents who challenged these permits were the parties together with the private developer, the parties that partook more than the town did in the lawsuits. There was discovery, there were depositions. Long story short, it was about January of 2019, so just about a year ago, there was an interest expressed by the private parties to engage in mediation to see if they could resolve their differences. The town did not participate in that mediation. It was a mediation between the private parties. Mediation occurred, and the private parties were able to achieve a potential resolution, but as is typically the case with a resolution that involves a permit that issued from a municipal body, it was subject to certain revisions to that permit. Also, there were contingencies relating to, for example, funding associated with the development, because, as I think is well known, a component of this project was funding from the Affordable Housing Trust and from the CPC. So a term sheet was entered into by the parties as a consequence of that January 2019 mediation. A settlement agreement was negotiated between the private parties in the ensuing months. I think that was ultimately finalized in or about April or May. I think it was fully executed by the end of the summer, in the August timeframe. And that's really what brings the matter back before this board, that one of the things that was contemplated by that agreement was that there would be a further application to this board for an amendment of the comprehensive permit that issued back in 2015, making certain modifications to the project that was approved. And that settlement agreement specified the modifications that were proposed. There was an attempt at recapturing that list in the document that I'm sure the applicant will submit tonight, that was submitted in advance of tonight's meeting, identifying certain changes to the project. And that is the question that is now before the board. How do you go about reviewing the modification application that's before you? And again, we can, at the appropriate time and with your direction, Mr. Chairman, we can discuss, process and procedure in terms of this board's review. But that's the short version of a rather lengthy history involving this project.
Okay, thank you. And from a prior discussion with council, my understanding, and I just want to confirm this with the other board members, is that our charge, even though this has been settled in the litigation, we still have an independent duty to review the application and make sure it meets the applicable standards under the statute. While it's not a true de novo review in that we're not necessarily required to go into things that haven't changed, where there has been a substantial change to the prior application and what was granted, those are the things that we are charged to look at with whatever level of specificity we determine is required to do it.
That's correct. So, as I had mentioned, there's a lengthy history of litigation involving this project, but even if that were not the case, when an applicant comes back before the board, at least in the comprehensive permit context, and seeks to modify a Chapter 40B permit that has been issued by this board or by any other zoning board of appeals, the scope of review by the ZBA is not to reevaluate the project in its entirety. It's really to review two things: the changes that are being proposed and any other aspects of the project that might be affected by those changes. And so to do that, you obviously need to know what the changes are, and then you yourselves have to be comfortable with what aspects of the project may or may not be affected by those changes, and you need to determine what extent of review you think is necessary with respect to either the changes or the aspects of the project that are affected by them.
Got it. Any questions from Dana or Evan at this point?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. I think the next logical step is, if Mr. DeFranza is here, if you might give us, I guess, a presentation of the revised application and where you see the differences and where we're going.
Maybe I'll just
Okay.
bring that back up.
It's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Andrew DeFranza. It's nice to meet everybody. Mr. Coffey, it's nice to see you're still standing. Tell Mr. Fahiri I don't take it personal that he decided not to show today, although I might, of course. This is the site that has been worked with for a number of years. There is in front of you here something that you have also, I think, in your packet that shows some of the variation between the previous project and this one, and it's a fairly short list, so I'll try to give you that in some specificity and point that out on the site plan for you. Is it okay that I'm not by the mic if I go over here, or do you need me to speak into the mic for recording purposes?
We can hear you, but I think we need you by the microphone to be
Okay.
picked up for...
I'll just point things out, and if it becomes relevant, I can move back and forth. So the main features is that building, as you see it there now, looks like a T shape. It previously was an L. In your packet, you have a document that shows the T, but highlights in yellow the previous L, which is what's here before you on this board. And so the building was closer to Maple Street, which is at the bottom of this site plan. As it were, if you can imagine the top of the T, if that just shifted down about 50 feet, that's essentially what the old building was. So it moved that leg of the building backwards and adjusted the angle very slightly, but not very much. The bottom of the T, as it were here, which is facing east, is mostly in the same position that it was before. So that adjustment was largely to comply with one of the terms of the settlement, which was to move the building 50 feet back. So that's what happened. That section moved back to move the building 50 feet back, which was a major provision. There are, as it may be relevant or there may be a question about it, to the rear, this does not impact the buffer zone at all because the buffer is quite a bit further back. To the west, as it were, to the Danvers side, you'll notice in front of you here, this plan shows a little bit of green color and a little bit of pink color. The pinkish color is the parts of the revised building that are now inside of the buffer zone. The whole building is outside of the no-build zone. So that's an important feature. It remains outside of the no-build as it was before, but the pinkish area of the building where it's shifted is new inside the buffer, the 100-foot buffer. The green is what previously was inside of the buffer and outside of the no-build, and now is no longer there, as it were. So there's sort of a trade green for pink, as it were.
Possible to put the plans up
Sure.
maybe on that radiator so that we can see it as well?
and I think you have this also.
Did this
No.
easel not?
Got this?
We don't have anything shaded. We received one plan.
Yeah, so let me just show you that, so you get that set over here. So this will go in. And then the new one is shifted back. It's all there, it's not down there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we can make this work, I think.
Robert knows what to do.
it's good, somebody did.
Yeah, Robert is
I think this line, that's probably why it's just like that. Yeah.
You think on the
Bring this, or
radiator?
is it- Yeah.
Okay, is that okay?
Or we can
use this
chair.
If that's any help.
Not like that. It may fall. How about we go like this? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Got it? So this leg of the building essentially went like this to accommodate the 50 feet, and shifted a little bit. Sure.
See if this helps.
Okay. These are not even, so I don't know if that'll work.
Are they quite off?
They're different.
Not easy, all right. Sorry.
I'm not sure that these guys can see that now. There you go.
Yeah, all right.
I can see them now. I
Now they
can see
can.
it lost it.
I've got it committed to memory at this point.
You got it right here.
Like that?
I'll move over this side.
All right, everybody. What's excellent about this is, the whole thing, of course. So the building moved, this leg moved this way. That got the extra 50 feet. And what I mentioned here is the pink is, this red line is the 100-foot. This is the no-build 50-foot, right? So the building went like this, straight back. And because of the curvature of the various lines, it came in and out of the buffer, but it's all outside of the no-build, as it was before. So the 50 feet was a major element of that, and that's been achieved. The other one that was significant is that it was originally 60 units in 3 stories, below the height limit for a single family, but still at 60 units. And so this is now 45 units at 2 stories, still with a roof line, but 2 stories and 45 units. You want me to pause for questions or just to go through?
I think we can jump in with questions as they arise.
Is that
and
okay?
Keep going.
Okay. So we reduced the anticipation then here is that there'll be reductions in a variety of features based on the 25% decrease in unit volume. That won't be the case everywhere. For example, the roadway is what it is. You don't get any economies out of that. One of the things we did keep, although there was some discussion about it, is just left the septic system as it was at 60 units. even though that's more volume probably than will be needed, but because that was an item that was of particular concern, we just left that alone because it already had been reviewed. There was extra testing done for water levels, and so that's just left in its where it is. But there will be other features that will be reduced by the 25%. Mainly among those will be parking spaces. So there was some question where you see that X at the bottom. That's just above Gracie Arcant's house, and so that was always the closest parking to any neighbor. So the anticipation is that those spaces would likely get removed, which I'm sure she'll be happy about. I don't think she knows that yet, and so that'll give some there may be some other areas. We know that's the case, though it's not relevant to the permit. It was part of the zoning board discussion around staffing levels and the like. So there will certainly be less staffing and whatever else there are relevant associated elements of that can be reduced with the 25% reduction in unit volume. I'm probably going to wish there were more of those than there will be, but that's, so far, parking is the main one that we've thought of, and we also wanted to confirm that that did not apply to the septic system. So down from 3 stories to 2 stories, down from 60 units to 45 units, and slightly adjusted in shape to hit the 50 units. I'm sorry, the 50 feet additional from Maple Street. A few other features of this. The original project was going to get built in 2 phases, 1 wing each phase. This is all single-phased, so there won't be 2 phases of construction. There won't be 2 stages of construction process. As I mentioned before, it's 2 stories. The building is 2 stories. We're also committing to blunting the windows as much as possible on this end. By which we mean that there would be as few windows there as possible to try to diminish any light or other inconvenience to the neighbors. That is, of course, within what's possible, and by code, for example, there'll have to be light in the stairwell. There'll have to be a window in the stairwells. But we'll make the windows as little as possible, so there won't be unit windows, for example, on that end. And that was one of the conditions of the settlement. Additionally, this is not related to the physicality, but was related to the permit. It is confirmed that the project will be age restricted at 62 and over. So that was a feature that was of some question and concern. There are some reasons probably for that, but just to confirm, 62 and over. So there are 3 legal levels of age restriction: 55, 62, and 65, and this is at 62. For folks who might be interested in that. And it also confirmed that there will be the project, and we as the nonprofit developer will pursue the maximum allowable local preference by state law, and according to DHCD's approval, which is not something that we would control, but that we would pursue maximum local preference. So those are the primary features: 60 to 45. A reduction in some of the elements based on that are consistent with unit reduction, occupancy 62 and over, single-phase construction, 50 feet of movement, height at 2 stories, blunted windows, and maximum local preference as allowed by DHCD and state law. And I believe those are the primary, not primary, but specific elements of the settlement that were relevant to the permit. And so we've conceded to all of those and adjusted the site plan accordingly to demonstrate where that building will be and what the shape will be. We have a sense of some of the elevation, which is the next board if you're interested in that. Not dissimilar to the original. Sort of a similar look to the original one, if people remember. Well, if you remember the original one, which had a clapboard style with rotating textures and an entranceway. This will be a little different because the previous entranceway had everything into that middle section. It'll largely be the same here, except the shape of the building is different than it was before. So those are the elements. Those are the changes as we understand them, and as we've requested, largely our request now, and I believe what we're required to do is request of you that the permit would be amended to reflect the terms of the settlement agreement, so then that would be binding inside of the new, or the amended 40B permit, which would be distinct from the previous one, which would have had different allowances. Happy to take any questions.
Maybe we could start at the table here and then open it up to others.
Sure.
With the movement of the building, it looks like you've shifted over into, is that an additional parcel that's added on to what was originally?
Mr. Burnett, who's the owner, essentially gave us a little extra piece in the rear. So you see that hatched section to the rear of the building. It's a slightly different texture. That's additional land. So that's an excellent point. We would not have been able to achieve the 50 feet movement if he hadn't given us extra space. So the original shape went straight across the back, and now you see there's that slight angle there.
You can use the cursor, I think.
Oh, I can't see it on here.
No, you can't see it on there. It doesn't show up on there. But you can see it up
Oh,
there.
yeah,
You
yeah.
see it?
Excellent. So this space here, Mr. Burnett added, and that's been added to the agreement, the option agreement. And that allowed for the shift of the building. It used to be here, right, and an L, and the whole thing went this way into the space that Mr. Burnett allowed. Is that your question, Mr. Go? Yeah. Yep.
And this is, the first time we're looking at this with any degree of specificity, so there'll be more questions that come up.
Sure.
But my recollection from the initial hearings is that there was a lot of talk about fire access around the building.
Mhm.
Has that changed is the topography of the new land permit that? Is it still impervious?
Yeah, it'll essentially, you'll apply the same logic just farther back. There's actually now a little more depth, I believe, in the rear. But the fire department, if you recall, was very specific about what they wanted to see. This, in my mind, this is a little harder to manage because the topography gets a little weirder back here, but you have to live with the same parameters that they asked you to before, so it may require some more grading. But we have the depth. Their primary issue is they wanted enough radius, or they wanted enough distance off the rear of the
So they could
building
turn
to
the
get a truck
trucks.
back. And we still have that. So they'll swing around. This is still the same to your question about topo. This section right here is almost exactly where the other one was.
Mhm.
So that topo doesn't change to here. Where it gets, something is right here. It's essentially the bump to the rear. So we'll have to comply with the same features in terms of their requirements for width off the back.
Okay. And I don't think we heard back from the fire department yet, but they'll certainly want to look at it.
Mhm. They do have it and have not commented to me yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know you're keeping the septic the same size. Is it going to be in
Yep.
the same place?
Same place, same size, same place. So it's all right around here. Right under the parking lot. So I had originally wanted to adjust that because it's one of the more expensive elements, but because it was such a sensitive topic in the original process, I was persuaded to just leave it alone, so.
I'd like to open it up to Evan and Dana.
Sure.
Your questions, if you have any at this point.
Sure. How much of when you changed the footprint of the building that's going to be located within the buffer zone, how much did the square footage of buffer zone that's built on change?
It's a good question. I don't know the exact number. I only could tell you based on, we asked them to just show the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
It looks fairly comparable in size. I think it's slightly larger. That's now in the buffer, but confirming that everything is outside the no build. So there was nothing added to the no build. If you wanted the exact square footage of the transfer, as it were, we could calculate that. Sure. But I don't know that at the top of my head.
I have no additional questions.
So maybe at this point, we could open up to the room.
Sure.
For folks who are here, maybe starting with those who, I guess, are in support. That way we can just order how we're handling these and then give the same opportunity to those who have concerns or are opposed. Any questions from those who are in support?
Good evening. My name is Caitlin Baptista. I'm an attorney at Hill Law, and I represent some of the abutters and neighbors who filed the appeal and are party to the settlement that we hope will resolve our litigation. We are conceptually in support of this modification. However, we didn't receive any plans. I haven't actually seen any of these 3 plans until today, so we would just request that we do continue tonight's hearing rather than act on it tonight, so that we do have the opportunity to review everything, especially with our experts, and just confirm that everything is consistent with our settlement agreement. I did note just a couple of little things on this site plan. We have 2 different compasses. One says north is straight up, one says it's to the side. There's also just seems to be, it's not stamped, it's drawn by author and checked by checker. So it's just a lot of, we'd like to see a more final plan, and like I said, just have the opportunity to run it by everyone and make sure it is consistent. I don't see any major issues as of right now, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else with questions, comments? Okay. My view, subject to input from my fellow board members, is that we need to acquaint ourselves with the decision that was rendered and how we got there. And then with that backdrop, I think then we can fully consider the proposed changes to what was previously approved and determine what additional review, if any, is necessary. So I don't think we're in a position to give you an up or down tonight, although I assume you didn't expect that we would.
Oh, no, I did.
Okay. Well, then I'm sorry to disappoint. So, yeah, I guess I would ask council to chime in as to logical next steps, having been through this process before, to make sure we as a board are fully acquitting ourselves of our duties to vet this and give it the full considerations due.
Sure. So I think what you have by way of submittals from the applicant is a good start. I think it presents to you the proposed changes from the originally approved plans. You've got, and I hadn't seen prior to tonight, the color-coded plans, which were helpful to sort of see the before and after, but I had seen the proposed plan as amended, so it's helpful to, in concept, see how things have changed. I hadn't seen that before last week when these were circulated, but it's nice to see an effort to put into effect what was agreed to in the settlement agreement. I think the question for the board, and I don't know if it's premature tonight because I understand that you've got to familiarize yourselves with the history, and that we've got a couple of members who weren't on the board when this was last before the board 4.5, 5 years ago. But the question is going to be, do you need further reviews by individuals other than yourselves? So when this application was first before you 4.5, 5 years ago, you had a number of consultants. You had an MHP facilitator who assisted the board, who is available to assist again if needed. You had a multiple peer review consultants, most notably an engineering consultant that reviewed the plans and opined on things like driveway design and topography and curvature of the driveway and parking and capacity and stormwater and those sorts of things. Now, consistent with what I said at the start of the public hearing tonight, if those aspects of the project are not affected by these changes, then obviously those need not be re-reviewed. But if they are affected, then it would be wise for the board to consider having that consultant or those consultants give this a once-over and confirm that the project as revised meets all of your standards. I think to do that, you may need more by way of submittals from the applicant. Again, I think this is a good start, and this is an excellent concept plan to show what's proposed, but these are not engineered plans. These are not what you required when this application was first before you. The plan I'm looking at, and maybe the plan that was the full scale, which I hadn't seen before tonight, that's color coded, maybe some of this is on there, but the plan I'm looking at doesn't even show, for example, setbacks of the new proposed building or portions of the new proposed buildings from the suggested extended land, crosshatch land in the back. So these are concept plans or a concept plan, but not engineered plans. I don't see stormwater specifics. I don't see landscaping or lighting or things like that. Again, I'm not suggesting that these things have changed, and maybe the easy answer from the applicant is going to be there's no change to lighting. The lighting is exactly as proposed before, in which case that may be a non-issue for you. But I do think that you need to to vet the project in that manner to be sure that just as you gave it your due diligence when it was before you or your predecessors did 4.5, 5 years ago, you're doing the same thing now. Because what you approve is ultimately what's going to get constructed and what the building department is going to be tasked with confirming has been constructed when as-built plans are submitted. And it's difficult to compare a final as-built plan to something that is not an engineered drawing, but simply a concept plan.
Okay. So with that, Mr. DeFranza, a couple of questions for you. First off, what, if any, timing issues do we have here? What are we working against? And we'll do our best to comply, but we need to understand kind of what the ground lay of the land is.
Yeah, there's some feedback to the Mr. Costa's points as well, which if that's useful. But primarily, you have 2 or 3 different variables in terms of timing. We've asked the Board of Selectmen for an extension of the Community Preservation Agreement, which had a provision that indicated we had to get a permit amendment by the end of December of last year, which of course we did not. And so we asked for an extension of that. I believe the request was for 6 months. To my knowledge, that's probably not been taken up. Is that okay to ask, Catherine? Is that
Yes, please.
That item is on the selectmen's agenda for the 21st. I have not seen the request, so I don't know what the outcome will be, but the
Right.
agenda item already exists.
Okay.
So hypothetically, if that were granted, which I cannot speak to, then we would have a 6-month, if they granted it for the 6 months we asked, we would have a 6-month extension of that period of time to achieve an amendment of this permit. And then the primary clock we're really running against is whether or not we can't make the state funding round, which would be roughly December of this year. There are many other variables other than yours that would impact whether or not this project is submitted in that round. But there is certainly an element of the more resources this process takes in terms of time and money, the less likely it is that that gets made. So there is some sensitivity to that timing, and that's the dominant funding for the project. There are not really other variables because of all of the other work that was done years ago with the Board of Health related to the septic system, with the Concom, and with this body. There are not other local things that are going to happen. Affordable Housing Trust has already voted, town meetings already voted on the CPA funding, and all of the other permits and approvals were granted. So there's not other things that are going to happen locally, but there may be things that happen at a higher level that are related to this in terms of timing, other than the extension of the CPA agreement by the Board of Selectmen.
Understood. And then, yeah, I would take your reaction to Mr. Costa's comments.
Yeah, I think our feedback, and I think that the logic that he described is fairly accurate, which is our view was that the building shape and location changed, but as you know, all of this is as it was before, with the reduction of parking here. So there aren't other changes to, for example, lighting or the septic system or the grading or the parking other than the elimination or the roadway. All of those things are as they were before. It's very likely that drainage will, if you recall, perhaps originally there was a little bit of drainage behind the building right here. I could imagine something like that getting eliminated as a ratio of total capacity because the building is significantly smaller. But there's other drainage here which would stay, and all of the septic system and the lighting is really here. So we could list out, I suppose, here are any proposed adjustments to the overall plan, so you had a sense of were there any changes. For example, there's not changes. The only changes to volume of cars, which was a big concern last time, is a reduction in volume of cars. So, peer reviewing the, parking would not be something we would expect, or the engineering, because the engineering is the same or less. Everything is either the same or less burden to the previous version, and nothing has been adjusted in terms of design at a level that would make that different. That would really be our position on that. We're certainly sensitive to the resources invested to this point, which are substantial. So, my appetite for a longer process that has a lot of moving parts would be not high. But if there were specific things you felt like you needed to know, then we'll be happy to do those. So.
So I think a logical start would be that list.
Mhm.
And then, in the meantime, I know Margaret was going to help us prepare packages for ourselves to review and become reacquainted with the original record
Mhm.
decision and what went into it. So I would propose that that submission come to us
Mhm.
sometime a few weeks in advance of
Sure.
whatever we said is the next meeting.
Mhm.
And I think at that point, we would be better situated to
Mhm.
express to you what else we want more information on,
Right.
subject to the input of my fellow board members.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would that also include the engineered
Yeah, the
plans?
engineered plan, I think,
I
would be
think we'll need
necessary to
that.
see.
Yeah, I think we'll have to check with the engineer and the architect as to what about the original engineered plans might be different than are already in the file. I think that would be my one technical concern. For example, the engineered plans of the septic system, which are significant, are already in the file, so there's not an adjustment to those. But I think that would speak to your list question. If anything has changed, we could give you an engineered plan of that. If anything is remaining, we could highlight that it's remaining and it's already in the file.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think the engineered plans
Sure.
of how the building itself is situated, I understand there's no changes to the septic.
Yeah, that's
so-
all we would need, is just
Sure.
the changed portion of the building.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
And I guess heeding council's advice that we're looking at not only changes, but things that may be affected by changes,
Mhm.
I would be over-inclusive in what you provide us.
Sure.
Hopefully heading off anything we spot that we think has been changed by a modification.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Do
I-
you have a timeframe when we would like to see that submitted?
I think a couple of weeks in advance of whatever we said is the hearing, and maybe we could talk about that now.
I'll look at
Right.
that calendar.
And also giving Margaret enough time to
Sure.
gather the record, or help us gather the record.
Yeah, I can get that.
All right. What days should we be looking at?
Well, I think would be into February in about 3 weeks. Other days that are better for the board, the second week of February maybe? I mean, Andrew, how long do you think it would take you to get plans to us with that information?
Yeah, I think if you want them like fully engineered, that could be a little while. So I would think at least a month. I'll have to talk to the architect, but
So a month before you get them to us?
I would think.
Okay, and then you want a couple of weeks to go over those, or do you?
We could probably do it in a week.
Yeah, I
With the-
agree.
with-
I'm,
With the plan portion, I think
Right.
the lengthier portion for us is going to be reviewing the previous
Exactly.
decision and
Oh, sure.
some of the
Right.
existing
Okay.
records. So
we can get that.
even if we had that engineered plan shortly before the meeting, I think that piece of information could be processed pretty quickly. I think, from our.
It gives you some time to look at the previous decision at the same
Yeah.
time. Sure.
Maybe your timing for engineered plans plus a
Yes.
week?
Sure.
Okay.
So
So
we're
5
looking
weeks
at-
out?
Yeah, maybe February 20th, which is a Thursday night.
Works for me.
That works for me.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions for the board. Do you think it's necessary for me to secure the peer reviewer? I've already reached out to Mass Housing Partnership, and they've given us a technical assistance grant, if you will, to use Judy Barrett again for
Mhm.
this project, just to have her review some of it. But Mass Housing Partnership pays for it. It's not anything that the town has to pay for.
Yeah, I think we should employ whatever resources we can.
What form would that take, like a conference call or something?
She'll probably come in and look at the project and go over it and speak to.
Would that need to be in a public hearing format for us to access that or to talk about it?
No.
No, I had an opportunity to talk to Judy. I know Judy, I've worked with her on many projects over the years. And so I've worked with her both as an MHP facilitator and in her capacity as a consultant. So she indicated to me she's happy to be as involved or uninvolved as the board would like. She can review the plans and prepare a memo. She can review the plans and have a conference call with the chair or a member that can then be reported back to the board, or she can attend a meeting if that's the preference of the board. She had a commitment tonight, otherwise she would have been able to attend. But she said she's happy happy to be as actively or passively involved as the board would like.
I think it would be helpful to have Judy take a look at the before and after, and if there's a memo to be prepared with her views on it, I think that would be informative. Then we can make a decision on whether or not we think we need peer review that'll be driven by what.
As far as the engineering, the stormwater, I don't know what the differences are in drainage or grading. That may need to be reviewed by an engineer.
Mhm.
But I guess the long and the short of it is, we're not looking to add to your tab, but we do need to do our jobs.
Mhm.
So February 20th?
Works for me.
Is that a 7:30 meeting? Art?
7:30,
Yes.
that would be 7:30.
Anything else for me, Mr. Chairman, that you need?
I don't think so. Thank you for the presentation
Sure.
and for your time.
Yeah, it's nice to see you all again. Nice to meet you too.
Thanks
Take
a
care.
lot.
Okay, so
I guess, do we need to move to
we
close?
would, no, we motion to continue.
Motion to continue.
But just so I'm clear, I will expect the plans and maybe the list of changes from Mr. Franza, and then I'll contact MHP, Judy Barrett through MHP, and get her take on it. And then, I don't know if you have any more questions for town council at this time, or I'll keep town council informed of it as I move forward.
Yep.
Just to understand.
And I guess the sooner you can get those plans to Judy, the sooner she can do her thing, and we can keep the process moving if appropriate.
You can send them to me.
Send it to you.
Yeah, I'll work with you.
And if board members have questions individually between now and the next meeting, I understand you can't communicate amongst yourselves, and I can't act as an in-between for you to communicate amongst yourselves, but
Yeah.
you can certainly communicate directly with me. I'm happy to respond. I wasn't involved in the first permitting process, but I'm quite familiar with the decision, having been involved in litigation for 4.5 years. So if you've got questions, whether they be about process and procedure or about the substance of the review, I'm certainly happy to respond between now and the 20th.
Okay.
All right.
So then I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening, or adjourn this matter, or, I'm sorry, to continue this matter to February 20th at 7:30, at which time we will take up whatever information has been submitted and take it from there.
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
From December 2nd.
So that will conclude the public hearing for tonight on the Harbor Light matter. The rest of what we have on the agenda is administrative, so you're welcome to stay, or if you want to take this point as a point to escape, feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone, did you all get the minutes? Were they forwarded to you? Did you have an opportunity to look at them?
I read them. Can I vote since I wasn't at the meeting?
They can, actually.
Okay. I mean, I watched it on TV, on
Oh, you
the
did?
cable. They seemed consistent to me.
Okay. Did, Dana or Evan, did you have any amendments to the minutes?
There was
I did not.
one of the edits was omitted from the minutes, but not from the decision. I don't know how big a deal that is.
I'm sorry?
There were 2 edits made. The minutes only contains one of them. About the horses, there was another one about determining the eligibility for the exemption under 40A.
Okay. And that was in, what section? What page? Was it the first or
It's the
second
first page,
First page. Okay, so
where I offered an edit for the horses.
minor edit on page 3.
There were two. There were 2. The first was the nor for determining purposes of eligibility for the exemptions granted by 40A. This is from memory.
Yes. Okay. I know what you're referring to, and that was reflected in the decision.
Exactly. I don't know how important it is to have that in the.
Yep, I will.
In the minutes.
I'll include that.
Looks fine to me, but I guess we can't vote on it yet because we don't have a quorum.
No, you two can vote. Two is a quorum
Okay.
to vote on the minutes,
I,
as amended.
okay. I endorse the minutes.
As do I.
Yeah.
Okay, so motion, Evan,
Uh,
second.
I moved to, yeah,
All right. Unanimous vote?
yes.
Okay, great. Alright, that was good.
And then we have to move to adjourn for the evening?
Yes, you can move to adjourn.
I think he wanted a final decision tonight, but
Then I would move that we adjourn the meeting for the
Yeah.
evening.
So moved.
seconded.
Second, so-
All in favor?
Aye.